Hi, today I went to Philadelphia to Independence Hall, where I went for the reenactment of the first public reading of the Declaration of Independence. So as we know, on July 4th was when the document of the Declaration was approved by the Continental Congress. And on July 8th, Colonel John Nixon gave the first reading to a public crowd. And this was really big for the colonies because it allowed the citizens of the country to understand specifically why the Congress was taking such a drastic step of declaring independence from Great Britain. A short history of what happened was, in June, Richard Henry Lee of Virginia introduced a resolution which in effect, just in a few sentences, said that the United Colonies are totally independent, politically independent of Great Britain. Then for a few weeks after that, it was debated in the Congress, and eventually on July 2nd, Congress did unanimously approve of that resolution that the colonies are now free and independent states. And then what happened was Thomas Jefferson and a group of 4 other congressmen had been preparing a draft in case, in the assumption that this resolution was going to go through. And so between July 2nd and July 4th, the Congress at large debated and amended the draft that was done by Thomas Jefferson. And eventually, on July 4th, that's when they all agreed to the updated document, which is now what we consider as the Declaration. Estimates are that they took out about 20% of what Jefferson had written, or amended it in here or there. So about 80% of it is originally Jefferson's, and then about a fifth of it is slightly amended. So then 4 days later, as I just mentioned, was the public reading, and that's what was held in Philadelphia today, was the public reading. And I went and I made a video about it. You'll see a couple of different things in this video of it. In the beginning, you'll see a building, and that's 7th and Market Street. That's the house where Thomas Jefferson was residing in Philadelphia, and where he is supposed to have wrote the Declaration. Then from there, I go down to Independence Mall and discuss, just some of the cool sites, and just briefly. And then eventually I make my way to the back of Independence Hall, the Pennsylvania State House, and I record some of the public reading. I debated back and forth on whether to record the whole thing and show the whole thing in this video. I didn't. If you want, you can find it. There's plenty of ways to find it. But the Declaration, if you didn't know this, is really broken up into 3 parts. The first part is probably the most famous, and that's what can be amounted to a preamble. So that's where there's the discussion of things like, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And it also has, it has some of the most famous phrases, and it sort of just introduces that the colonies are breaking away. The second part is gives the reasons for the separation. So it lists a bunch of reasons that Great Britain and King George III had abused their power over the colonies, and these reasons are why the Congress wants to declare their independence. And in the third part, kind of wraps everything up, and most importantly, it kind of officially declares that the colonies are independent. So in the video you'll see I record most of the first part, then skip most of the second, then come back for the third. The second part is very interesting. You can either read it online or find a video. I would recommend it. I just didn't want to include it because it is somewhat long. So without further ado, we're gonna go to the video, and I just go step by step, and you can just follow along with me, and that eventually concludes with the public reading. One other thing is that it's interesting for me, this is just a personal note, is that I love England and I love Great Britain. I am a huge England football fan, soccer for an American audience, and I also love the politics of Great Britain, and I think that in some cases the colonists were a bit off. I'd love to discuss and debate that on another video, but I did want to mention that, you know, obviously I live in America, so there's mixed feelings on this, but I did just want to mention that I think that this is a very complicated topic, and there's a lot of sides to it. So now here we go. And like I said, the first part, you might be a little confused. All it is me recording the house where Jefferson lived in Philadelphia, and then from there I start to narrate and walk around, and you'll see. So thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy it. Hello, I'm in Philadelphia today on Independence Mall. Behind me is Independence Hall, which is where the Declaration of Independence was debated and ultimately signed. It used to be called the Pennsylvania State House, and it still is actually, but most people call it Independence Hall because of the historical significance to it. All it is a museum today. There's no current political debates that go on in there. Today is July 8th, which is 4 days after Independence Day, July 4th. The significance of July 8th and why I'm here today is that the first public reading, supposedly, of the Declaration of Independence was done in the courtyard behind Independence Hall, which I'll be there later. Done by, it was done July 8th, 1776. And this was important because it allowed the citizens of Philadelphia, where the document was produced, to hear it publicly for the first time. They probably most people probably hadn't even read it by then. So I'm just going to take you around to some of the sites, and then hopefully we'll enjoy the reading later. So to the left of me, and we'll go over here in a minute, is the Liberty Bell, but it is also, and what I'm going to talk about now, is the house which was where George Washington lived while as president. So in a sense it was the first White House. Not only was it that, but before the Republic started, before George Washington assumed office, while he was still commander of the Revolution, or commander during the Revolution of the Continental Army. After the Battle of Brandywine in September of 1777, when the British took over Philadelphia, their Northern Army was headquartered here, and it was, the commander at the time was General William Howe. And in the winter of 1777 going into the spring of 1778, General Howe resigned as commander and went back to England. And in his place, as General-in-Chief of the British forces in North America, became General Henry Clinton. And Clinton, actually, after the battles of Brandywine and Germantown, when the British were headquartered here, actually, this was his own personal headquarters during the British occupation of Philadelphia. And we're going to walk over here in a second. And what's interesting is, what I like to do is, if you think about it, Clinton was in the spring going into the summer of 1778. The British actually had to evacuate and leave Philadelphia because what was happening was, as the French were starting to get into the war, the British wanted to concentrate their forces in New York. And so they had to leave Philadelphia, and that led to the Battle of Monmouth in central Jersey, about maybe 60 miles north of here, across the Delaware and the New Jersey. So while you're sitting here, you can you have to picture the geography that Clinton and the British Army was thinking of, in the sense of how they were preparing to evacuate Philadelphia. So they had to think that Washington was not too far away in Valley Forge. Valley Forge is maybe, I don't know, 30 miles west of here. And they had to think of a way to successfully leave Philadelphia. And the Battle of Monmouth, while it might not be the most famous battle of the war, it's very important because it amounted to a draw. It was fought on June 28th, 1778. And what the Battle of Monmouth did was that it gave the Continental Army a lot of confidence going into the stretch run of what turned out to be the stretch run of the war, because the British really went all in on that battle. Or let me take that back. They didn't go all in, but they certainly, if they could have, would have dealt a serious blow to the Continental Army, and they were unable to. And the reason why, from the Continental perspective, why that was so important was because throughout the winter of 1777 going into 1778, the Continental Army was encamped at Valley Forge, and they had a really brutal winter there. But ultimately, through the help of people like Baron von Steuben and some very good training, the Continental Army in some ways emerged stronger out of Valley Forge. So, to think of so there were several reasons, as I'm going to walk over to the presidential house in a second, why the Clinton and the British had to evacuate Philadelphia. As I mentioned, the French were getting into the war, so the British had to concentrate in New York. And also, the war at this point was starting to shift a little bit to the south in the Southern Campaign, where Cornwallis, General Cornwallis of the British Army, was beginning a campaign. And what the British would have ultimately liked to do was come up through South Carolina, of course into North Carolina, and ultimately into Virginia, and sort of pinch the Continental Army, Washington's army. They wanted to destroy the Southern Army, which was commanded by Nathaniel Greene. But of course they were unable to do this, and ultimately in 1781 they were defeated at York. Cornwallis was defeated at Yorktown, trying to escape to New York to meet up with Clinton. And the Battle of Yorktown, which turned out to be the decisive battle of the war. So we're going to walk over now and take a look at the presidential house. Okay, so in the distance there, that's the National Constitution Center. That's just a museum. There's no historical significance to that, but it is a very interesting museum if you get to visit it. They're doing some construction there. Right there is the Independence Visitor Center. That's just a visitor center where you get the info and get the tickets for the various things. One quick side note is on this street right here, which is Market Street, famous street. This is where, if you're a college football fan, this is where College Game Day was headquartered for the Temple Notre Dame game. I I guess that was October of 2015. So if you want to look that up, this is where they were, right here. I was here. So this is the presidential house where I can get a good view of it. They've done some really good work the past couple of years of unearthing it. There's really not much left to it. But you could think of it as the first White House because of the fact that George Washington lived here while he was president. And then ultimately there was the compromise where Washington, D.C. became the capital, and of course the White House was built, and John Adams, the second president, was the first president to reside there. So this building right here is where it's another museum, and this is where the Liberty Bell currently resides. We're not going to go in there today, but that's where the Liberty Bell is. And right next to that is, as I was showing earlier, is Independence Hall. We have some people out here doing yoga, getting a good stretch in. Very important. Okay, so we'll be back later for the public reading. So I'm in the back of Independence Hall. This is today called Independence Square, and you can see this is just the back of it. It's a really nice yard. What's interesting is that during the debating and during the first or the Second Continental Congress, this is where the delegates would, come out and discuss issues. It got really hot in there, and it could be nice to get some fresh air, and so it's very nice. And also, if you've seen the movie National Treasure with Nicolas Cage, great movie. This is part of where that took place, a famous scene. And also the TV miniseries George Washington starring Barry Bostwick, there were scenes that took place here. So I'm gonna flip the camera around and we're gonna just take a look at some of the sites before the public reading starts. So that's the statue of Commodore Barry. Of course, was not there in 1776. So I'm not going to be taking a tour today. I'll do that on another time. But if you can see the people lining up right over there, and you walk in and then you take the tour. But today we're going to stay outside for the reading. Okay, so I'm going to go into this area in a minute.
Congress, July 4th, 1776, a declaration by the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled. When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitled them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused his assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained, and when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation, and hold them as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends. We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. That they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Signed by order and in behalf of the Congress, John Hancock, President. Attested, Charles Thompson, Secretary.